Hey, welcome back to the channel, guys. So today I wanted to cover the, well, somewhat new alchemy system that's been added to the game. It's very, very strong. Everybody should be working on alchemy if they're not already. And I'm just going to break down how exactly it works, and then we'll go into some more pointers on what I recommend you try to get for your alchemy effects. So, first off, let's go ahead and just look at a piece of equipment that has alchemy rolls on it already, so I can explain what exactly everything is doing and how everything works. So, I'm going to go to my fist right here. So you'll notice that the alchemy effects here have specific innocence on them. For effects 2 through 4, so 2, 3, and 4, you need to match all of the innocence on that conditional section here to get that effect. So, ideally, you want to try to get a roll that shares the same innocent. It'll make it a lot easier to match them. So, for the first one right here, your first slot, this guy, you only need to have an innocent of that type to get the bonus. So, for example, if you look, all of my extra innocent slots that aren't being used to meet these conditions are this red slime right here. That's because I have the red slime in my bonus. So they're gaining that additional bonus regardless. Alright, so what I recommend doing first when rolling your equipment is work on these two on the bottom first, because they have the most RNG. There's a lot of effects that these two slots can take up, and you're going to want to try to get the effect that you want there first using the easier to get currency, which we'll get into later, and then start focus on re-rolling your individuals. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and check out and see exactly how this works in practice. So, we're going to go over to the Etna Summer Resort, go to our printing workshop right here, and you're going to click on Equipment Alchemy. In the Equipment Alchemy window, you're going to select the piece of gear that you want to change an effect on. So, for the purpose of this, we'll go ahead and pick the fist here. There are two different materials. If you want to reroll a specific slot, like right now I want to reroll a specific slot, you're going to go ahead and select that slot and hit Re-Alchemize. When you do that, it's going to use a Prelixir. Alright, these are a bit rarer than the other one, but they let you reroll just one slot. And you actually have no downside to rerolling a slot because it doesn't force the reroll. So what I'm talking about here, I'll just go ahead and show you. I'm going to go ahead and reroll this 10 SP at the start of each battle. And when I reroll that, it's going to ask me if I want to keep what I have or if I want to go with the new roll. So I don't want wind damage dealt on my fist. It's not very useful to me, so I'm going to go ahead and hit cancel. And I still have my plus 10 SP at the beginning of each battle. So that is what I recommend doing after you've rolled a decent piece of equipment. You want to try to get the best rolls you can first using these pre-prism. So we're going to go ahead and use those and see how that works. So I'm going to go ahead and right now I'm working on some equipment for my my supports here. So we'll go ahead and just re-roll this guy. So for this, you have to have none of these locked. If you lock anything, it's not going to let you alchemize. It only lets you re-alchemize. So we're going to go ahead and alchemize this. I don't generally care about anything that's on it right now. And with our new piece of equipment, it's just worse in my opinion. Not very good. Anyway, point being, that's how you roll those. So I'm going to suggest now what I recommend you use this for, and also some rolls that you might want to get. So for a damage dealer, right? First off, we'll go ahead and open up another piece of equipment here. Your first slot is always going to be Innocent Effect. It always increases the potency of the innocence in that piece of gear by a number from 1 to 40%. It's always going to do that no matter what. No matter how many times you roll it. Your second slot has two options. You can either get critical rate up by anywhere from 1 to 20%, or you can get critical damage up from anywhere from 1 to 100%. I personally believe if you're going to be aiming for higher raid rankings and whatnot, you're going to want the critical damage. The critical rate is nice if you're just going to be, clearing regular content, and you might need that crit for maybe something that's just a little too difficult for you to beat. It'll help you with your sanity, but the critical damage, if you're going for a high raid score, you want to deal as much damage as possible. So you're going to go for critical damage on a damage dealer. Next, for a damage dealer, are these two slots right here. There's a few options I'd recommend. The first one I'd recommend works on basically any character. You're going to want damage dealt with special moves, and that caps at 20%. Another option is you're either going to go for elemental or non-elemental damage up. So for my Kalidia here, I went with non-element damage up. That also caps at 20%. But if you're using an elemental DPS, like Thunderlord Laharl or Supreme Overlord Laharl, you're going to want the element damage boosts more than anything else, because those actually cap at 30%, so it's 10% more damage. So it's a much better option for characters that, use an element for their damage. Another decent one that you can roll is damage against monsters or damage against humans, or any of those if you're going to go for raid score specifically, but otherwise I would avoid those. And an okay roll, if you get it, it's not the worst thing. What I have right now, the plus 10 SP at the beginning of each battle, or plus 5 SP at the beginning of each turn. Those are decent, but in a good team composition, you're probably not going to need them. They can be useful, though, because it kind of opens up your team building a little bit. You might not need an SP battery anymore if you have this, so they're not awful rolls, but I wouldn't recommend aiming for that roll on a damage dealer. So, on a support, though, supports have the same first two, obviously. All weapons will always have these two. And for your third and fourth slot for support, I'd actually recommend what's called action gauge at the beginning of the battle. And that caps at 80. So what that does is it kind of pushes their turn order forward. And it can stack. All these things can stack, by the way. You can roll the same thing in your slot 3 and your slot 4. So you can actually total out to a pretty respectable plus 160 action gauge at the beginning of the battle, and that's very useful. Or I recommend getting the SP ones. So we have this SP at the beginning of the battle or the SP at the beginning of the turn. Those can also be incredibly useful for supports. I wouldn't be too worried about your damage roll here or crit roll for a support. They're seldomly useful. Some off DPS support types might want them, but I wouldn't be too focused on this. I would try to get either that action gauge or the SP down here. Alright, so that's it for weapons. Now for gear, though, we actually have some different nuances. Equipment has some slightly different roles. It has the same first for your slot 1, where it's just going to be Innocent Effect from 1 to 40. Your slot 2 can be either HP, Defense, or Resistance. It doesn't matter too much, but if you're really trying to min-max it, I would just go for the HP, probably. It's caps off at 350,000. It's not the best, but it's not terrible either, and it's going to be more useful in more content, as enemies are either going to deal physical or int damage randomly. It depends on who you're fighting, right? So I'd recommend that if you really want to go for it, but I wouldn't be too fussed about it. Now, the really important ones are the slot 3 and 4. And for support, or really anybody, even a DPS would probably take the same rolls, are either action gauge, reduction resistance, which caps at 20%. And what that is, if you were playing during the last raid, you know how we started all the way in the back of the action gauge? This mitigates that. And again, it stacks on itself. So if you rolled this in both slots, you'd have 40% resistance immediately, so that you're going to be starting much further up. And remember, you can have multiple pieces of gear equipped, so you can actually completely eliminate the action gauge reduction effect, which would be very strong. And the other thing I would go for, once you're already at that 100% action gauge reduction resistance, or if the enemy that you're dealing with specifically deals with these things, I would go with status ailment resistance. So that also caps off at 20%, again, can stack. So normally the most annoying status ailments are probably paralysis, sleep, and forget. I'd focus forget, because your supports and whatnot that can cure things generally aren't resistant to forget, which would make them not be able to cure all the other status ailments off your party. But I wouldn't really worry about poison. It's probably the weakest of the status ailments. But these are useful in certain content. I wouldn't say it's mandatory for all content. But yeah, that's basically what I would do for your equipment rolls here. Now, some recommendations on how you can really use Alchemy to its maximum benefit is, I can actually showcase that right here on this Orion's belt. You notice it's got a speed of 12, and normally that would be maximum of 10, but because of the innocent effects right here, this is going to amplify your speed innocence, which is, it can amplify any innocent in here, but speed innocents are probably the most crucial. And what this will let you do is greatly increase the speed of your supports to make sure that they can get in front of your damage dealer. And then you can also start stacking these up on your damage dealer's Orion's belts and start getting their speed up more. And speed is very, very strong in this game. Once you're over 75 speed, you can outspeed literally any enemy in the game. And if you're aiming for raid scores, it's basically just a race. Everybody's just trying to get the maximum clear speed. So the higher your speed, the higher your score. Generally, what you're going to want to be aiming for on innocence on your equipment, period. I can't really think of any other innocent more useful on gear, personally. Like, attack innocence can be decent on some belts, but I'd recommend just filling out with speed once you actually have the attack, because your weapon is going to do enough there. But, yeah, that's basically it for the video. I think I explained just about everything I wanted to. I guess I'll catch you guys in the next one. I hope this was educational. And good luck with your rolls. See ya.